What's up, everybody? Welcome to episode 4 of the TrineDay Studio Sessions podcast. My name is Scott Armstrong. I'm very grateful to be here with all of you once again today. And again, we have a very esteemed panel of experts, historians, people who know this topic inside and out, and we've come together to share the truth that they don't want you to know about. If you haven't noticed, isn't it interesting that most of the stuff you've never heard before? I'm sure, many of the people in our audience have, but if this information's new to you, aren't you just pounding your head against the wall, being like, why was this not taught to me when I was in school? Well, it's very obvious because when we have the information, we gain the power. And so, really important that you share this episode, share this podcast with everybody that you think would get any value out of it or has an interest in these topics. And of course, what we're here talking about today is the amazing book, Two World Wars and Hitler, Who Was Responsible?, which you can get at TrineDay.com. Make sure you go get a copy today. It's a great gift. Again, if anybody that you know resonates with this podcast, I'm sure they would resonate with the book. So we're here to dissect the book, discuss it, unpack it, and get into further detail. So with us, of course, is the publisher of TrineDay Books, Chris Milligan. Chris, how are you today?
I'm doing just fine, and thank you very much, Scott.
Awesome.
And excuse for not being on the last one, but things happen. Now, the discussion about this book, Two World Wars and Hitler, who was responsible? Anglo-American Money, Foreign Agents, and Geopolitics. And, we're talking about history, and we're also looking at what's going on today and history. And one thing during the last one, Guido talked about Orwellian history, and we've gone past geopolitics to where it's a show that they're creating, and they're trying to get you on one side or the other so that we can be fighting each other because a very astute and one that works is a way is to divide the population and get us fighting each other. It's a very old tactic that has been used. And one thing is we are dealing with the secret societal system, okay? Which again, you have a secret societal system. Your next solid system is the sovereign countries, okay? And in between that, you have corporations and intelligence agencies and criminal gangs among and also religious organizations that are trying to affect history. Now, we talked about uh, the Rhodes and his secret society, Cecil Rhodes, that he set up, that he wanted to bring, America back into the British fold. And again, with these secret societies, um, they they really don't care about their sovereign countries, and they will manipulate their own people to get an outcome. And it truly seems like the outcome that the uh, well, thing we're supposed to be scared about a lot of times, there's going to be a new world order. Okay, and these people are working towards this, and these people are working towards this. Well, um, we have a situation here where in this book, we're able to look at the machinations that have brought us into today's world. And one of the most amazing machinations was the creation of Hitler. Okay, because to create these big games, they've got to have players out there. And then once they find the player, they will make the game about them. And the situation in between World War I and World War II, you had geopolitics still in play at the time, okay, where you had money powers trying to manipulate different governments, get them into the shape, and then so we would have, this war. So there's a guy by the name of Putzi Hafenstengel that most of us have never heard about. Okay, he came from a top a German family. His family had also married a top Boston Brahmin. He was going to Harvard, and he ends up being Hitler's piano player. Now, Jim, you had something that you wanted to read that will lead us into talking about Putzi?
Yeah, I do. I can go on to that if you want just now. I just thought it might be interesting for yours to get a little taste for what's in the book. So we talked about it last time
And
how the fight.
just real quick, you guys, before we get too far into it, I wanted to say this is Dr. Jim MacGregor, one of the co-authors of the book. And so, and we're also joined, I just want to say real quick, by Dr. John O'Dowd, the other co-author of the book. John,
How you doing?
Hey, how's it going, guys? So we're all here to discuss it. And of course, I just want to say real quick as well, we also have Guido Preparata and Richard Spence here with us, returning guests, returning champions. So thank you, guys. So go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. The last episode we talked about the actual fighting, the years in the First World War, and came to the end with the Versailles Treaty. That fighting, as we discussed, ended with an armistice in November the 11th, 1918, and Germany, as we discussed, was falsely blamed for starting the war. I'd just like to read a little bit from the book to give people a taste of what we're saying in it. Members of the Milner Group doubtless raised their champagne flutes to toast the successful accomplishment of the first stage of their plan for global control. The masses had been encouraged to view the carnage of 1914-18 as the war to end all wars, but it was neither the end nor the beginning of the end. The so-called First and Second World Wars were not unconnected entities, but a continuum. And we just heard it. We're honoured here tonight to have the Italian historian, Professor Guido Preparata, in this panel. His outstanding book, Conjuring Hitler, How Britain and America Made the Third Reich, is a must-read for anyone who wishes to understand what modern history was really about. The Guido relates that the so-called First World War had merely been Act One of what was essentially a 30 years war between 1914 and 1945. There weren't two wars. It was one long, extended war with a lull in the fighting in the middle. And Guido, what called this the Great Siege of Europe? The Great Siege of Europe by America and Britain. He writes, I'll just give you a quote from what Guido writes. The main objective of this titanic siege was the prevention of an alliance between Germany and Russia. If these two powers could have fused in an embrace, they would have come to surround themselves with a fortress of resources, men, knowledge, and military might, such as to endanger the survival of the British Empire in the new century. From this early realization, Britain embarked upon an extraordinary campaign to tear Eurasia asunder by hiring France and Russia, and subsequently America, to fight the Germans. The vicissitudes of the first half of the 20th century made up the epic of the Great Siege of Europe. World War I completed the first act of the attack, which was crowned by the imperial ingress of the United States on the grand chessboard. Germany had lost the war, but she had not been defeated on her own territory. That's the end of that quote from Professor Preparata. And the second act began when the Milner Group and close American associates promoting and funding a reactionary regime in Germany that would manipulate into further conflict. Guido adds, the premeditated purpose was to ensnare the new reactionary regime in a two-front war, World War II, so-called, and profit from the occasion to annihilate Germany once and for all. To carry out these deep and painstaking directives for world control, two conditions were necessary. One, an imposing and anti-German regime secretly aligned with Britain had to be set up in Russia. Two, the seeds of chaos had to be planted in Germany to predispose the institutional terrain for the growth of this reactionary movement of, quote, national liberation. The first objective was realized by backstabbing the Tsar in Russia in 1917 and installing the Bolsheviks into power. So back to the main book. Reading from following the first act, World War I, the Milner Group and Anglo-American financial supremos planted the seeds of chaos in Germany with a disgraceful Versailles Treaty, falsely blaming Germany for the war, with crippling reparations payments and encouragement of rampant inflation. They manipulated the economic and political situation in Germany to denigrate and undermine emerging socialist movements. Anti-war Marxist theoretician and leader of the revolutionary Spartacus group, Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht, were brutally murdered by thugs in January 1919, together with many of their followers. Kurt Eisner, 51-year-old minister-president of the recently declared People's State of Bavaria, was assassinated just weeks later. So they're clearing out the people who are against fascism, basically. The victorious Anglo-Americans, who now had massive influence in the defeated Germany, viewed with interest a small right-wing reactionary group, the nascent National Socialist Party, led by the then unknown Adolf Hitler. Hitler had served Germany throughout 1914-18 as a dispatch runner in the Western Front and remained in the army after the war's end. In April 1919, he was selected as his battalion's spokesman, and much to his surprise, he discovered that he could stand up and address a room full of people with some confidence. He began tentatively contemplating a career in politics as his way out of poverty. Now, in his famous book, The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, William Scheer describes the situation Hitler then found himself in. The prospects for a political career in Germany for the now 30-year-old Austrian without friends or funds, without a job, with no trade or profession, or any previous record of regular employment, with no experience whatsoever in politics, were less than promising. And at first, for a brief moment, Hitler realized it. For days, said Hitler, I wondered what could be done. But the end of every meditation was the sober realization that I, nameless as I was, did not possess the least basis for any useful action. How then, within a few years, was this strange man who had drifted along in the fringes of society, shaking the world with the thunderous tramping of his invading army's jackboots? American journalist Louis P. Lochner, who lived in Berlin for many years, met Hitler regularly and observed him at close range. Lochner described the situation he witnessed in early 1920s Germany as progressive political chaos, with the entire country debilitated by hunger, poverty, strife, and internal fighting. Into this situation of confusion, wrote Lochner, hopelessness and despair burst the raucous voice of a rabble-rouser and demagogue with a remarkable facility for being all things to all men, Adolf Hitler.
What pages are these in the book? So
What page?
Yeah, so people could follow along.
In my book, you're talking about Lochner's book or my book?
Oh, I thought you were reading out of your book, aren't you here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't have it right.
Okay. That's all right. That's all right. That's all right.
So where was it? Adolf Hitler, his techniques seemed so uncouth, his logic so faulty, his platitudes so insufferable, his manners so boorish, his record of personal achievement so blatantly non-existent, his educational background so spotty, his misrepresentation of historical facts so preposterous, and the rituals he created for his movement so ludicrous, that the majority of dependable Democrats, including the intellectual strata in the trade unions and the Social Democratic Party, failed to take him seriously until it was too late. By the time they awoke from their blissful dream that Hitler was more or less a Charlie Chaplin-like comic figure, he had built up the most powerful political movement in modern history. Now, like most Hitler biographers, Louis Lochner and William Shearer present interesting and useful details, but offer no credible explanation for Hitler's meteoric rise to power. The German historian Volker Ulrich writes, "There will always be aspects of Hitler we cannot explain, and that people would never stop pondering this mysterious, calamitous figure." Ulrich doubted whether there would ever be a definitive biography of the man with, quote, deep-seated psychological complexes, huge destructive energy, and a homicidal bent. Now, Professor Ian Kershaw, he's a British establishment historian with a close interest in Nazi Germany. He suggests that Hitler's ability as a mob orator, which, according to Kershaw, was just about all he had to offer at the time, does not explain his rise to power. We should, says Kershaw, look in the first instance less to his own personality and to the motives and actions of those who came to be Hitler supporters, admirers, and devotees, and not least his powerful backers. And as we say in the book, examining Hitler's powerful backers is indeed the only way one can ever hope to get close to solving the mystery of how this man came to power in Germany. Now, tellingly, few British historians have ever undertaken such an examination. The stark truth related in our book is that from 1922 onwards, it was the Milner Group in London that supported Hitler, and the international bankers in the city, London and Wall Street, New York, who financed them. Hitler had recently left the army and was drawing ever larger crowds to his political meetings in Munich beer halls. In 1922, the closely cooperating British and American secret intelligence services sent 2 special agents fluent in German to Munich. Their task was to ingratiate themselves with Hitler, offer him their support, and prepare him for power. Those agents, Putzi Hanstegel and William de Ropp, would spend the next 15 years directly at Hitler's side doing just that. Putzi Hanstegel's mother, she was a very wealthy American with friends and relatives in high places in the US, as Chris said earlier. She was a Boston Brahmin. Putzi attended Harvard University in 1906 to 1910, and thereafter lived in New York, where he ran the prestigious Hanstegel Fine Art Gallery on Fifth Avenue, the illustrious Fifth Avenue. At that point in time, he was quietly inducted into US intelligence. That's what we show in the book. We give all the examples of people he met and who drew him into that. The other man who was sent in alongside Hitler was William de Ropp. He was a Lithuanian who had emigrated to England in 1908 and taken British citizenship. He loyally served in the Royal Air Force throughout 1914-18. And both Hanstegel and de Ropp were sent to Germany posing as staunch supporters of Hitler and the Nazis, and were completely successful in concealing their true role. In 1933, Hanstegel played a major role in deliberately burning down the Reichstag, the German parliament in Berlin. Nazi arsonists were responsible, but Hitler blamed the communists, and the Reichstag fire proved the key event in enabling him to seize dictatorial power. Thereafter, he eliminated all political opposition and began a reign of terror against Jews and socialists in Germany. All the while, he was shielded and funded by Anglo-American elites and passed off in the West as a good leader for Germany, an essential dam to prevent a flood of Russian communism into Western Europe. So that's just a little taster I'll send back to you, Scott. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. That's a taste for you guys. So of course, if you want more, TrineDay.com, get the book. And Chris, so what do you think? What is the significance of this Putzi character here? Maybe you can kick it off here for us.
Now, they needed a way to take this really rough guy and turn him into a leader. And Putzi was the rough guy. And I mean, Putzi was a gentleman who taught Hitler the salute. It was basically something that came from Harvard. He took Hitler and told him, gave him lessons on how to speak and how to get the crowd going. I think Guido has some information about Putzi. What do you know about Putzi, Guido?
Actually, I only read his diary, the Hitler years. So I didn't know much, and I guess Jim's book and Chris has the new good stuff on it. To me, he was just I haven't given him and the prominence that apparently he deserves. So as for the salute, I thought he took it from the Italian fascists, so I didn't know about this one. I knew that he certainly. I remember this part where he gave them lessons in etiquette and manners and things of that sort, and he was more generally in these books, aside from the new research that's been carried out in Jim and Chris's book. He belonged to the aesthetic, to the cultural artsy aspect of Hitler. I didn't know he was so politically relevant. As a matter of fact, this is news to me.
Well, actually, it's John in Jim's book. And John, do you have any comments about Putzi?
I think the idea that Putzi was just a clown, a piano player, is absurd. If you look at his antecedents, both in Germany and in the United States, and of course, he taught Hitler more than the American salute. Americans used to salute the flag with what's now regarded as a Nazi salute, but it actually came from the US of A. But the idea that he was just this sort of guy, and that he left his comfortable life with his new wife from the roaring 20s in the United States, New York, and went to war, destroyed Germany just to go back to the old hometown is patently absurd. And then when you see who his contacts were both there through the American embassy and others, and how he was brought into contact with Hitler himself, it's mad to think that it was other than a planned effort.
Richard, do you have any thoughts on Putzi?
Putzi Hamstengel. I first ran into him. Here's one of the cases you can sometimes run across characters and they're just sort of they're like the friend of the person that you're actually looking at. So when I was doing research on Aleister Crowley's doings in New York during the First World War, one of the things, and he was connected with the German crowd there, Putzi Hamstengel, Ernst Hamstengel, showed up. And he, of course, I think has been mentioned, was running the family business in Manhattan, Franz Hamstengel Fine Art. And that had a very interesting clientele. So one of the regular customers at that business was J.P. Morgan and J.P. Morgan's representatives. And that's I think, is the sort of key to Putzi, is that he is socially well connected. So he's the type of person that if he was going to accompany Hitler to a dinner party, it then gave Hitler a kind of entree to that group. But here's some interesting little details that, without looking for them, I came across and jotted down about Hamstengel during the First World War when he was doing business in New York. Among the other New York Germans that he was friends with was a writer by the name of Hans Heinz Evers. And not many people know who Evers is today, but he's sometimes been called the German H.P. Lovecraft. He basically wrote horror stories. He was also a German intelligence agent. He was running money in and out of Mexico. He went on a couple of missions to Spain. U.S. intelligence became aware of that. And then that's how they became interested in Putzi, because he was connected to Evers. And they began trying to collect information. So most of this comes out of American intelligence reports in that period. The other thing that there was a connection between German agents in New York, or with Irish nationalists, the so-called Fenians. Let's just call them the IRA. Oh, that's wasn't what they were at the time. And one of those was a figure by the name of James Larkin, an Irish American who had been heavily involved in Fenian activities for years. And he was hauled in and interrogated on the idea that he and his fellow IRA associates were essentially operating as agents for the Germans, which to some extent they were. And he was asked about German money that was being given to the IRA in New York. And Larkin mentioned that the man that he was getting money from was an art dealer on Fifth Avenue by the name of Hanfstaengl, that he was the kind of bag man for this. So Larkin is, and I don't see any particular reason why Larkin would just make that name up out of thin air. But keep in mind, this is one person saying that. But so Hanfstaengl's connection to Evers, who was a known German agent, Larkin's statement that Hanfstaengl was used and in fact, the money was in some way being laundered through the business. This was a way that you wouldn't have anything that would be traceable to the German consulate or elsewhere. And that, I think, in terms of what has been discovered more about Putzi, might give an idea as to how, one, American intelligence first becomes aware of him and his connections. And it also gives them an entree to recruit him. Because what I think is that that's the beginning of the process by which Hanfstaengl was turned. Now, it's been mentioned he has an American mother. She is a Sedgwick, a fairly influential family. And by the way, among the Sedgwicks, among the people that he's related to through his mother is Franklin D. Roosevelt. And FDR also was one of his, Putzi had gone to Harvard. He had two interesting classmates at Harvard while he was there. One was FDR, the other was John Reed. And if John Reed's name doesn't ring a bell, John Reed became one of America's first establishment communists. He's also the guy who wrote 10 Days That Shook the World. He went to Russia in 1917 as an American correspondent and also as an American agent to observe the Russian Revolution. This is one of the things that I discovered about Reed, and you didn't have to dig too closely to find it, is that, yes, outwardly, he was a pro-Bolshevik, a communist through and through, a founder of the Communist Party of America, but he was also working for American interests the whole time. That becomes abundantly clear if you simply look at who he's connected to. So Hanfstaengl was a man with a lot of connections. One of the other things to note here is that although the Americans had been tipped off that he was some kind of German paymaster, that's what they pegged him, they don't arrest him. Nothing happens to him. I can even tell if they ever pulled him in for questioning, because he, again, has these kinds of connections. But that, I would bet you, is how the approach was made, and how Hanfstaengl, who is a man who really fits between two countries. Remember, he's German, but he's also American. He does business in America. He does business in Germany. It's in his interest to maintain good relations on both sides. And so he signs up to supply information, and in the early 20s, he goes back to post-war Germany, and finds himself that it's there. There is I think Putzi himself writes about the fact that he is approached by an American military intelligence officer in Germany and asked to, you know, here you have this friend. So we're kind of interested in him. So pass on information to us about it. Mr. Go-Between.
Yeah,
So,
he also had links to the British royal family, so there's a British connection there as well through his father. And of course, when he came back from Germany, having committed treason, one would imagine, to the American side anyway, he's given a job by Roosevelt and a house in Washington or near Washington, having been Hitler's pal for 12 years.
And having been FDR's classmate.
Yeah.
So there you go.
It doesn't make any sense at any
doesn't.
level other than that he's got something to do with this whole process.
Interesting. It sounds like he was just Hitler's PR guy. And then I'm looking at his Wikipedia page over here, and it's just so whitewashed. It's like, oh yeah, and then he kind of worked for President Roosevelt for a little bit, and he did some work for Harvard. You know, nothing to see here, guys. No big deal. No big deal at all.
Well, the thing you'll notice is that he's well connected, and nothing ever really sticks to him. It's a version of the get out of jail free card, which is always something. If you encounter it in somebody, people who are involved in activities that should get them into trouble and somehow it never does, there's usually a reason for that. In the simplest term, the reason for it is because they're an informant, which is essentially, in a Hank is a glorified informant, working both sides of the street, primarily for the U.S., but no, nothing ever gets him in trouble with the Americans because he's useful.
Now, what were some of his connections prior? Okay, so obviously he was connected with the rise of Hitler. Do you feel like there was any connection with some of the American factions that were then helping to fund Hitler and you know put him in a position of prominence? Was Putzi at all like a go-between in those efforts?
He could probably be a go-between with most anyone. Again, his social connections are part of this. He's connected to Munich society. He can be invited to the finest homes. He knows how to, you know, the whole idea of him training Hitler in etiquette, I think, is an important part of this because Hitler really didn't have that. Hitler's essentially a kind of working class Austrian who doesn't have the social skills. He's the type of people that the better homes in Munich would never, you know, he'd have to come in through the back door if he came in at all. But his mere presence besides Putzi brings him to a party that makes him okay. Yeah, you've probably encountered that. There was someone who has status, and a high status person associating themselves with a low status person can transfer a degree of that status. It can get you into a party you otherwise would not be invited to. And that's one of the things that Hitler needed to do. And whether it's in Munich or it's in New York, Putzi knew everybody who was anybody. And those kinds of connections play a role. It gave him credibility. It gave him access, and it gave him credibility. And he could then transfer some of that access and credibility to his new friend Adolf.
Go ahead.
This book, Two World Wars and Hitler, Who Was Responsible? Like I've said before, I mean, I've read a lot of different books about all of this, but this one really puts it together and shows the machinations up at the top level, you know, with J.P. Morgan and all these different people. Because, you know, I've been looking at Skull and Bones, and they basically were able to get their hooks deep into the American strata here in the lead up to the Spanish-American War and through the drug trade. And then when you look at the drug trade, you find that these same people are working together on some of these other subplots, whether it be like Sutton was talking about Wall Street and Hitler, and how Wall Street brought about the German quote unquote miracle, and brought them back up so that they could be a fighting machine. And then, all through the book, it shows the perfidy where, like, in World War One, we were sending money there supposedly to make sure that the Belgians didn't starve, but then that money was also used to keep the German army going. So we obviously are looking at a situation here where we have people in financial and other situations fomenting wars for to move history in the direction that they want, a direction of consolidation and of control. And now, Guido, your book Conjuring Hitler. Uh, where do you say Hitler came out of?
To me, I have the uh the main engine of my book is Thorsten Veblen. I mean, the biggest cog in the machine is that article I cite is a review of John Maynard Keynes the
Economics?
economic the economic consequences of the peace, the book he wrote after Versailles, economic consequences of the peace, I think it is. At the time, he was the Paul Krugman of the day, right? Or Paul Krugman wants to be the Keynes of the times, and his book sold thousands of copies. They were just the liberal book. They were the politically correct books, and so on and so forth. So he was very famous, and already in those days, he also had been part of the delegation, British delegation, Versailles, and Veblen was some kind of a less known figure in the academic world, some kind of a strange maverick. Anyway, he writes this review of his book from some academic journal. Nobody notices, as I wrote, the article is virtually unknown. Nobody read it, nobody cared. It was just some kind of a routine review. Turns out that to me, it's the most beautiful piece of political economy ever written. I have never written anything superior to this. It's 4 pages, and I'm not going to tell the whole story. But he just says this guy Keynes was there, and his book is he puts it, of course, in some kind of a detached academic style, but the message is clear. This let's call it this political figure, this publicist of the British world was there and has written this book, but it's a put on. It's a major deceit. At Versailles, the seeds have been planted for the next war, but not out of myopia, as everybody said, because these old curmudgeons don't know what they're doing. They perfectly knew what they were doing. He doesn't really care. He calls them elder statesmen. To him, he doesn't distinguish who is who. He's not interested in seeing what fraternity. Not that it's not important. To Veblen, he looked at the main forces. And before I guess we were talking about Richard was mentioning John Reed, and this Bolshevik thing was to many people at the time, as we all know, phenomenal. They had no idea, and they're receiving this news that over there, paradise had arrived. Finally, after a whole century of labor protests and so on, and clashes all over Europe and in the States, in Russia, finally revolution had happened. Reed writes. I don't know if Veblen reads book. I don't know when Reed's book comes out, but he's definitely part of that movement of intellectuals that were disgusted with the robber baron system that was the great second industrial divide, the trusts and so on, that kind of shape that the world was taking, and receive and celebrate revolution in Russia as a phenomenal, fantastic, millenarian, beautiful process. And Veblen buys it. He thinks so too. And so convinced now that you have paradise on earth in Moscow and soon all of Russia, because that was just beginning, and knowing that the evil system, the evil business enterprise machine where it's parasitic lords and its exploitation, its unearned income and all of that, Veblen calls absentee ownership, being the devil. So he finally have a forces, this clash between good and evil. He says, okay, so now I see it all coming together. And he writes this piece in critique of Keynes, says Keynes has understood nothing. What's being prepared over there is, and he writes this in 1920. So with a 20-year anticipation, he foresees, he says, we're going to have a new war. And the new war is that they are not enfeebling, they're not weakening Germany at all. And here's the absolutely phenomenal part, the genius of Veblen. He says, had they been real, they should have done one thing which has not happened. Had they been real in wanting to teach Germany a lesson into being a civil country in the world, they should have done one thing which they didn't do. They should have pretty much sequestered the war loan and all their financial securities, put them in some kind of a trust fund under the supervision of the Allies, and see to it that changes were being implemented by holding on to their financial wealth. It didn't happen. As a matter of fact, they didn't touch the war loan at all. They didn't touch securities at all. They said they're gonna impose all of these famous reparations and payments and all of that. But he says that's make believe. It will never happen. What's going to happen, says Veblen, and he uses this term, is going to be radicalization at home for the coming of a revanchist movement, even more militarized than Prussia herself was, and to launch, so they're waiting for it to come. They're going to foment it, and they're going to thrust it against Russia, which for him was Eden on earth. So he gets it almost 90% right. He didn't get the part on Russia, but he can be forgiven because the rest, he's the only one on the face of the earth who saw it all. So I took that phenomenal piece that no one anywhere, not in academia, not in history, has ever found, but it's there. I mean, you go into the collected works of Veblen, you'll find it. Nobody saw this thing, and I'm still to this day, I don't believe it that I'm the only one who took notice, but because I was a fan of Veblen before, that's why. I took that, and then I took another piece in his book on Germany. He wrote this book on Germany about how Germany became what it was. It's called Imperial Germany and the Industrial Revolution. Phenomenal book. He writes it during the war. And there's a passage in that book where he goes through the history of Germany's peasant revolts and so on. And he draws a character of the future rabble-rouser that might come back to take hold of a situation should there be chaos in leading some kind of a populist movement of seething resentment, whatever. And it's in my book. I cited. I don't have it with me, and it's a portrait of Hitler. It's him, and so there. So you put two and two together, and then you have it all. And you don't need people say, "What's conspiracy theory?" No, it's no conspiracy theory. One of the most celebrated social scientists of all time that nobody reads had seen it come together in 1920, and these are the two pieces. And so this is just basic dynamics, the basic forces.
Again, that gentleman you were talking about, what's his name?
Thorsten Veblen. He's a sociologist, a Norwegian-American sociologist. He's a weird character. He is son of Norwegian immigrants in Minnesota, and he's kind of a man of two worlds. He's born in 1857, dies in 1929. His name is known in the social sciences because he coined expressions like conspicuous waste, conspicuous consumption. But truth is, he wrote this, his masterpiece is called The Theory of the Leisure Class, which is the most incredible representation of how a parasitical system is. It's an entomological description of society. It's, to me, it's the most important book ever written in the social sciences, and he's written a variety of other amazing things. He's for me, he's just like, he's the Michelangelo of the social science. He's unique. I mean, all these others, I mean, Marx or Kane, I mean, they're dwarves compared to this guy. So and yeah, so that's him. And I already worshipped him as a scientist, and then when I found out that he had a variety of reflections on politics, because that was his era, because he witnessed all of this. No, well, he didn't. He saw World War One, not the second one. He dies on the year of the crash, 2 months before the October crash. But he de facto he is the bard of that catastrophic era, and he's virtually unknown. So, yeah, Scott was saying, how come they don't teach us these things? Well, yeah, exactly. Because if they did, then everything, all this construction of mythographies, which we think we construct our own erudition, would just fall into pieces, and it would be a big problem for the educational system for obvious reasons.
Well, Sutton, in one of his books, he talks about how the order controls war and revolution. Okay. And because, I mean, human history, wars and revolutions, change history. Okay. And so if you can control how the wars and the revolutions happen, then you have a pretty good handle on history. Now, you're saying that this gentleman gave a perfect description of the rabble rouser that they would need in Germany to create Nazi Germany. Is that what you were saying, Guido?
Recurs in my book in the chapter where I talk about America and how America joins the war, also by citing all the great literature of the time, John Dos Passos and all the and Veblen describes America as going crazy, as an asylum. It begins with the Spanish-American Wars, but World War One changes the faces of America very much. Yes, in that chapter, in that portion of the first chapter, I quote him extensively because he's extraordinary, and the portrait of Hitler is there. That's 1915. Hitler's in the trenches. But Veblen had collected enough anthropological evidence to be able to conjure already the kind of typologies that were going to give flesh and form to the conflict that was coming, according to the other prophecy he made. So in a sense, it's science. There's not even conspiracy. It's science. You read, you see patterns, you understand the dynamics. You go look for wrong, not for underhand dealings, such as you saw in Versailles. Everybody says, "Oh, poor Germany." Kane saying, "Poor Germans, they can't do this." The poor Germans that, and he says, "Poor Germany, nonsense." They're setting it up with ruthless logic. It's going to happen. It's going to take time, and so on. Well, he doesn't say it's going to take time, but that's how it works. They take time. So he looks at clues and he just projects what's going to happen. And what's a prognosis or diagnosis, and he sees ahead, and it's a beautiful, a typical example of how not just genius but just logic and great knowledge brings you to a almost perfect forecast. If it hadn't been for that sentimental enthusiasm he had felt for the Russian Revolution, which had conquered the hearts and imaginations of a lot of radicals in those days.
Right. You said they there at one point in time. Who are they?
All these guys that you're all talking about, and you, Chris, and Jim and John, you're trying, and everybody else is trying to, and Sutton, they're trying to find the ramifications and the particular type of groups, and as I was saying before, of fraternities that animate this kind of a world. It's a very difficult kind of, extraordinary difficult kind of research, because even Freemasons will tell you that, I met some, and they say, you want to talk about Freemasonry, you got to be inside, or else just shut up. This is what they told me. And Ernst Junger says the same thing. He talks about, and I quote him in my book, Ernst Junger, very important figure. He is the bard of Nazi literature. To me, stylistically, possibly the greatest writer of all times, writes this most important book on the Marble Cliffs, and we'll talk about it that later eventually if you want. And Junger says the same thing. And Junger is a World War I hero, the most youngest decorated officer, and Hitler read his book In the Storms of Steel, and he's the elitist. Junger is the elitist Nazi. Long story about of Junger, and Junger too, who then joined an order. He was an initiate himself. I don't think he was in the same. Well, speaking of orders, was Hitler eventually, and I'm sure Jim and John will get to that. Got, the story is he got inducted into an order in Thule, in the Thule Society.
Right.
Junger, I don't think he was in Thule. He was in another one, even more elitist, I think, because he kind of snubbed these other people. But originally, he was very, very supportive. So I don't think it was Richard who was reading. Was it Scheer that said that Hitler, or Lockhart? I don't know who said that Hitler had a very coarse view. I don't remember who's being cited about that one, but it wasn't that coarse, and it resonated with a lot of Germans, even sophisticated Germans like Junger. So going back to what we're saying, the mapping the orders extremely hard. And Junger said, don't even try. He says, if you want to try, the tracings and the tracery of the orders, where all these things are being discussed, are generally halls in which the historian loses himself. You're going to find people, and such as in my book, like Trebitsch Lincoln or Parvus, very key in organizing many things, but most important was the trip of Lenin across Germany, right, all the way to Finland, and then St. Petersburg. They'll tell you you'll probably find them all in the same lodges, talking to one another, circulating from one room to another, according to a logic of and a code that, unless you're part of that world, you will never understand. And they are bound to an oath of silence, as we all know. And all of them, nobody speaks really. And they say that those who have let too much out generally get killed. So, but that's what we're all trying to do.
Roberto Calvi.
Calvi, yeah. Oh, God, yeah, that's another mystery.
who was suicided under the London Bridge.
The Blackfriars, yeah.
Blackfriars Bridge.
Yeah.
Jim, you had your finger up. What do you want to say? You're muted.
I'd like to come back in and refocus on Putzi Hanstegel, because I personally believe he's one of the most important players in the whole history of the 20th century. Not for what he was, but for who he was connected to. And Richard Spence was saying they probably drew him in about 1915, if I got Richard right, and he was sort of sucked in. But I think it was much earlier than that. And the important thing is for people to understand that Putzi came from an American mother's side. He came from a family of Americans who'd gone to the West, to New England, and with the Pilgrims in the 1600s. General Robert Sedgwick was his great grandfather times 5, and he was one of the main players in Boston. He built up all the fortresses around Boston and the defenses around Boston, and he fought the French and in Canada and chucked them out. And then he was made the Governor General of Jamaica, and he was very friendly with a lot of the leading players in America. And his coming down from generations after him, they were very close to the American founding fathers, and they had George Washington and all the rest, really important players in the founding of the United States. So this guy puts he's not just some student that turns up from Germany to Harvard. His grandfather, his mother's father, his Bootsy's grandfather was close to a guy called Endicott Peabody. And Endicott Peabody opened this big school in Groton in Massachusetts. And Groton is famous as being the feeder school for Harvard University. And so Endicott Peabody, he came from the family, George Peabody, people have heard of that. It was him that started the bank in London in the 1840s that became the J.P. Morgan Bank. That they're all tightly connected, these people. And in fact, Bootsy's great grandfather was one of the founders of Harvard University. They set it up, the people in the colony set it up as a college for training Jesuit priests for the church, and it became Harvard University. So
Calvinist priest, Calvinist.
So but when Bootsy went to Harvard, he was taken under the wing of the long-term president of Harvard University, who just happened to be his mother's second cousin, Charles William Eliot. He'd been famous. He was friends with the Wall Street bankers, with Jacob Schiff. He went walking in the hills around there every second weekend. He was friendly with Rockefeller. He was friendly with J.P. Morgan. They were all pumping big bucks into Harvard for the medical school and to take control of medicine and take control of science, basically. And so Bootsy was invited every second weekend, say to President Eliot's house with his wife, because he was a great uncle of Bootsy's. And there, all these people, very, very important players in this whole saga of crushing Germany, the Wall Street money power, they were all there. They were all friends. Bootsy was meeting these guys virtually from the first day he was at Harvard, first weeks, months, he was getting involved with all these really crucially important people. And when he was in Harvard, he made friends with Theodore Roosevelt Jr., President Theodore Roosevelt's son, his eldest son. And Theodore Jr. took him to the White House to meet his dad. And from that moment on, Bootsy and President Theodore Roosevelt became good friends, very good friends. They both admired and loved each other, basically, with a very close bond. And Bootsy would be invited to the White House to play piano. He's a fantastic pianist. He played the White House's grand piano at the president's big parties and balls, and he would go out to, when the president was at his holiday home in Sagamore Hill, Bootsy would go out there and spend the weekends with him. So he was close. He was very close to the president of the US. He was very close to the top bankers in Wall Street, and he was very close to the people who were controlling the center of Harvard University, which was their basic educational institution for controlling the money power, used to control so much of what went on in America, and still does. While he was at Harvard, Bootsy became friends with Walter Lippmann. You'll have heard of Walter Lippmann, one of the greatest, supposedly, journalists in the world. He was actually a close friend of Bootsy. He became a top journalist in the years before the war, and he worked for Edward Mandell House, who was the controller of Woodrow Wilson before this, in the decade before we're talking about here. He was controlling Woodrow Wilson. So Bootsy's close to this guy who's close to Mandell House, and he's also close to John Jack Reed, as Richard said. And Reed, he was at Harvard at the same time as Bootsy, and they were both in the amateur dramatic society called Hasty Puddings. an acting society, and John Reed was in this. Him and Putzi were good friends, and Anthony Sutton, it is, I had a quote from Anthony Sutton, but I can't find it. Anthony Sutton said Reed was financed by Wall Street. No qualms about it. This guy's been financed by the big money here to go into Russia and play a role in the Russian Revolution, in the Bolshevik Revolution. He's also close at Harvard. In his Harvard years, he's close to a guy called Warren Delano Robbins. And this guy, Warren Delano Robbins, is a first cousin of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And this guy Robbins is a secret agent. He works for American intelligence. And American intelligence in New York at this time, very closely associated with British intelligence. The two of them are working as one way, really. The importance of that is when Putzi sent in as a sleeper agent to Munich in 1921, he spends about a year just finding his feet, and they let him find his feet. And then the call comes from the American embassy in Berlin. Right, come on, we're putting you into action. And the man who makes that phone call is Warren Delano Robbins, who's now the second in command of the American embassy in Berlin. And so you see all these little circles, wheels within wheels, all just keep going around all the time. And he tells Putzi he's going to send a guy called Captain Truman Smith. And Truman Smith, he wasn't at Harvard, he was at Yale, but he was part and parcel of this whole system, and he was in American intelligence as well. And it was him that was an American intelligence agent from the American embassy in Berlin goes to see Hitler that night. Says, "Oh, I've got somebody I'd like to see, Mr. Hitler, a big American fellow. Yeah, send him along to the beer hall tonight." And that's how Putzi gets introduced. And he's not going there as some individual German citizen who's interested in Hitler. He's going there, and he admits that he's going there on behalf of the American embassy, the US embassy. He's going there to introduce him to Hitler, suck him into his circle, which he does very, very successfully, grooms him all the time, feeds him, gives him money for clothes, pumps a lot of money into the Volkischer Beobachter, the Nazi newspaper in Berlin, and builds it up from a once or twice a week sort of journal up into a very powerful daily newspaper that starts pumping out Nazi propaganda. And this is Putzi. It's not Putzi that's funding it. It's, of course, the money's coming into Putzi from the Wall Street bankers. They're funding all this. And Putzi, going back a step further, I should have said, when Putzi leaves Harvard, he goes to work in, I think Richard said it, on Fifth Avenue, the Family Art Gallery. And there he's meeting a lot of people. And he writes about these people in his diary, his silent witness. And he's talking about people like Bell Green, who was the curator for J.P. Morgan's library and museum. She'd have an immensely powerful position. Morgan gave her an open check, but go and buy Rembrandts all over the world and stuff. She's actually working for Mandel House and the British intelligence, William Wiseman, who's in New York. And she comes into the gallery and she knows Putzi's been drawn in by this time. She knows it. It's not something that she's got to find out. She knows, she's been told. And then they have a love affair. Putzi's heartbroken when she goes off. And he meets, who else does he meet? Alistair Crowley, as Richard said. Crowley comes into the gallery and spends time with Putzi. And in fact, he's I don't know if I can remember if you said it in your book, Richard, that Crowley, there was quite a lot of information or suggestions that Crowley was deeply involved in the sinking of the Lusitania. He was encouraging the Germans. This British agent's trying to pass himself off as a man who detests England. He passes himself off as an Irishman who detests England, and he wants to help the Germans against Britain. And he was encouraging them. Why don't you sink the Lusitania? That'll teach them a lesson they'll never forget. and the Lusitania's been used to take munitions across the Atlantic. Every voyage, it's getting rammed full of munitions for Britain, and he actually encouraged it. And he's encouraging it on behalf of Room 40 in the British Admiralty. And the people in charge of Room 40 in the British Admiralty, Admiral Hall, Blinker Hall, they call him, is one. And the other one is Winston Churchill. And these guys have a major role in the sinking of the Lusitania. And the sinking of the Lusitania is used to draw America into the war, not to draw into the war, but to swing American public opinion, which is very anti the war. It's said they don't want America in the war, but they need stuff to start swinging American public opinion in favor of the war, and that's one of the situations that Putzie and Crowley were involved in. I'm sure Putzie was involved in it. And there was another instance of Black Tom Pier explosion, a massive explosion in New York, a huge big munitions dump in America, in New York, where they were bringing munitions from all over, storing them in the big dockside sheds in New York before they were putting them onto the likes of the Lusitania and other passenger ships. This went up, massive explosion, blamed it on the Germans, and Sutton and a few others are quite adamant that Putzie was heavily involved in that. No, Putzie, that Crowley was heavily involved in that, and Crowley, we know, was close at that time to Putzie. So there's a good chance that Putzie was involved in. Just two other things, just before I finish. He was also close to two other guys who worked for British intelligence in New York, Frank Harris and John Quinn, two really quite important players in New York. So right through Harvard and right through his time in New York, Putzie was getting deeper and deeper enmeshed in the Anglo-American establishment's intelligence services.
Yep. And you have all this, again, going back to Guido, these different orders, these different secret societies that are around it, moving things around. John, you had your hand up.
Yeah, just one more thing on Putzie. And it's important because not only was he there, as Richard says, to be a social convener for Herr Hitler, but he was actually close to the action in two very important events: the Beer Hall Putsch, and in particular, as Jim outlines in the book, the Reichstag fire. Now, the important thing about the Reichstag fire is it took Hitler from being a minority player in an elected government appointed by the Chancellor of Germany into being the main guy. And after that, after the Reichstag fire, after he managed to, Putzie was involved in that. I don't know exactly how he was involved in it, but he was more than just an observer. He was possibly in the building at the time. And as a result of the Reichstag fire, Hitler gained absolute control of Germany just at the right time. And having gained absolute control of Germany, he destroyed all opposition in Germany. That was a crucial part of it. So he was more than just the scouting and sort of coaching. He was heavily involved. And of course, after the Beer Hall Putsch, Putzie helped, and after he got out of jail, Putzie rehabilitated Hitler. Putzie's wife apparently stopped him committing suicide. So there's a whole load of stuff where he's actually more than just a social convener. He's deeply involved in the actual. He's an agent provocateur. He's deeply involved in the events, crucial events, which took place in Germany as well, and he had sanctioned to do that.
Mr. Spence, you know a little bit about.
Can we go to Adam Finnegan real quick? Adam's had his hand up.
Yeah.
Adam, we have Adam Finnegan from TrineDay Publishing in the house. What are your thoughts on all this, man?
Yeah, I haven't gotten into Putzie yet specifically, but there's a lot of overlap here with some of the stuff I covered earlier in the Sleeper Agent, where, like I brought up Aleister Crowley, as he had crossed paths with someone, what was his name? I quoted from Richard Spence's book in Secret Agent 666, and it was like, so there was a biological warfare campaign against America after Britain caused a false flag against Germany and tried to get Germany to think the Americans attacked them. Then they launched a counterattack bioterrorism campaign. But what I see is that it was like it seemed British intelligence, and we know that British intelligence had thoroughly infiltrated that campaign, and it looks like they were steering it to make it much more devastating as just playing sides against each other. I wish I had kind of gone more deeply into Britain's role in my book, but I did in the beginning, and it was just like it was amazing because it just once I started to read Two World Wars and Hitler, it really became apparent because a lot of the stuff that I was reading in World War One was happening around the same time. Um, and there's this one guy, his name was Erich von Steinmetz, and he claiming to be a German, one of the German saboteurs, but instead of going through neutral Scandinavia like the others do to get to America, he travels all the way through Russia and then to San Francisco and then to New Jersey. And he shows up at this guy, Walter Scheele's house, saying, I'm one of the saboteurs. And Scheele doesn't trust him. And they get into an argument. And he punches him and sends him on his way with his briefcase full of germs. And then later, he sneaked in dressed as a woman. But this guy later gets arrested, and he like kind of he details all the information, and it seemed to me like this guy was actually not a German agent at all, but perhaps a British agent. And it's just yeah, there's a lot of overlap, and I just it's amazing, and part of me kind of feels like the main character Eric Chaub may have actually been working for Britain possibly too, because he does take a trip to Britain earlier before he went into veterinary medicine. It's just yeah, I just find it really interesting, and I'm just actually shocked at how controlled it was because I just got through like all of the stuff in the First World War, and it's appalling. It's to see the level of deceit that is used. I mean, it's just absolutely uh, you know, it's mind blowing. But I commend this book so much. I'm really enjoying this book. I definitely recommend everyone. I actually recommended it to a friend today, a physician from Germany that I'm friends with.
That's awesome.
That's
So,
it.
Mr. Spence.
Oh, I was just going to mention a couple of things. One, I think, as the story goes, that after the beer hall putsch in 23, when the excrement hits the fan and the revolt has failed, whose house does Hitler go to? Where does he show up? Where does he take sanctuary? Putzi's house, which I think suggests that he thought he would be relatively protected there, which he was. The other thing I just want to throw into this, just because, I don't know, why not, is that another name that anybody might want to keep a lookout for. You won't see it occur often. Another kind of unusual German operative who's also working for other people is a fellow by the name of Kurt Janke, Jahnke. So if you ever see Janke's name mentioned, all kinds of interesting things are going on. He was a German naval intelligence, not army intelligence, but naval intelligence agent from back before World War I, came to the U.S., joined the U.S. Marines, because his assignment was then to go to the Philippines and other bases and to collect information about those bases and supply them to the German Navy, especially in the Pacific. The Germans had holdings in the Pacific, and the Americans had acquired the Philippines. So the Germans, for instance, were very interested to know what kind of fortifications the Americans were building around Manila. And so that's part of Janke's job. But from the beginning, there's always this kind of, somewhat like Putzi, this sort of cross-pollination between the Germans and the Americans. And Janke then figures into, he will go on to become an obscure but important figure in German intelligence during World War II. So one of the people who has a lot to say about him is Walter Schellenberg, who become the the head of much German intelligence during that. And Schellenberg admitted he could never quite tell who it was that Janke was working for, and he suspected he was pretty much working for the British, the Americans, and the Russians, which it turns out he was. And just to give you an example, I mean, Janke is another example of these very shadowy figures. Guido will recognize another one in the person of Ignatius Trebitsch Lincoln. These people are just sort of, they're just there at certain points of time. It's the people that they know. Putsy's sort of like this. And one of the things about Janke is that during World War II, he's not a member of the SS, but he's connected to his intelligence branch. He's captured by the Russians in 1945. Basically, he's just waiting in his house for them to show up. And he's taken to Moscow. And I've eventually got the records of where in 1947, 2 years after the war and after long interrogations, he's on a list of Germans who are executed. There's actually an execution order with Stalin's signature on it. It used to be shot. But then he's reported in the British occupation zone in Germany in 1950. And I was never sure whether that information could be correct or not. Maybe it was someone pretending to be him. And I eventually traced down his niece, who was still alive or was still alive, and asked her whether she knew anything about this. And she goes, "Oh yeah, I was told by my mother that, yeah, her brother was still alive. She met him. He was around until the 1950s. He died somewhere in Germany around 1959 in Hanover." So it's even the case of where you think people are dead and then they're still around. So it's another mysterious figure of this kind that figures earlier on. And we've never really talked about the Thule Society, and that may come up other time, but that's this German secret society, which is actually part of another secret society. But the guy who gets that whole thing going is this figure by the name of Rudolf von Zebotendorf. Now, there's a German name for you. And Zebotendorf, that wasn't his real name, by the way. He's actually, Adam Glauer is his real name. He's off before World War I, running around in Constantinople. And that's something, again, that people can look for is in the pre-World War I period, what sort of strange things are going on in Constantinople. You've got a revolution. That, again, is where our friend Trebitsch Lincoln is running around doing things like selling guns. And Glauer, or Zebotendorf, is also there hanging around with the Young Turks, being initiated into Eastern Masonic lodges by a Jew, by the way. And then also selling guns. I would be sure that at some point Trebitsch Lincoln and Zebotendorf are sitting in the same room having Turkish coffee together, discussing a gun deal. Now,
actually, Richard, Trebitsch was there, I think, for oil, and Parvus was there for guns.
Yeah. Well, Trebitsch, at one point I've run across the road that he's also dabbling in guns.
I have Zebotendorf's treatise on the occult rites of Freemasonry, but I can't read magic. But yeah, it's a crazy story.
I mean, Rich did an interview about Zebotendorf.
Well, the thing about Zebotendorf is that he then, towards the end of World War I, leaves the Balkans, shows up in Munich with money from somewhere, and takes over this local branch of what was called the German Order, or the Germanen Order, which was one of these kind of racialized theosophy groups, not particularly large. He renames that the Thule Society, and then begins to reorganize it as a kind of political instrument. And so he's the one that, and one of the things that he does in the Thule Society is to decide that, well, we have to have a kind of outreach. So the Thule Society can no longer just be this group of aristocratic dilettantes who like to study astrology and ritual magic. So we have to reach out particularly to the working class. And so one of the things that he calls the Rings of Thule, one of our satellite organizations, is a thing which is set up, which is the German Workers' Party. And that is the same group which in 1919, Hitler, as a propaganda agent of the German army, will join and eventually assume the leadership of, and which will in due course be renamed as the National Socialist German Workers' Party.
Okay, well, it's all starting to come together, folks. All of these mysterious characters behind the scenes that all of this is new to me. Like, a lot of this is new to me. This is fascinating, you guys. Amazing. Really value all of your expertise here. Does anybody have any final thoughts? Any final words to stick a pin in this particular conversation?
Can I just mention a chart that I mentioned in the reading from the book that we never followed up on? Very important man was William de Rock. He was a Lithuanian who moved to England, emigrated to England in 1908, and took British citizenship. He married a woman called Fisher, whose relatives were very rich and very deeply involved with the Milner Secret Society. De Rock became a British agent, like Pixie was an American agent. So the British put De Rock in alongside Hitler. So he's standing at one side of Hitler, a British agent standing at one side of Hitler, and the Americans have got Pixie Hansdale standing at the other side of Hitler. They are at Hitler's side for 15 years. 15 years they're guiding them, they're controlling them. And while all the money's getting poured in from Wall Street to fund the Nazi war machine that would allow them to fight the Second World War, they're right in there. They're deeply involved. So that's a name that folks should think about as well as Pixie Hansdale, as William de Rock.
Awesome. Well, geez, even more to dig into. You guys, of course, all this information is in Two World Wars and Hitler, Who Was Responsible. Make sure you get a copy of that. TrineDay.com. Chris, do you have any final words? Any final thoughts?
No, just the preponderance of our history that has been planned out in secret through these secret societies. And we are living in a time where, a lot is becoming known. And it behooves us to learn where we've come from so that we can get to a better place, because it seems like a lot of the same playbook they are playing out here in the United States right now. Okay, dividing the population and setting up a fascist government. And it's really sad, because government of and by and for the people is a high ideal. And Lord have mercy, I hope we can get there sometime.
Exactly. And then the more we get these conversations out there, these types of conversations, learning more about the history, the hidden history, the all of the spies and secret societies and all the nonsense that are all behind these large major world events and characters and figures that we do know about, the more hopefully we can move the whole enchilada closer to freedom. So, all right, well, I really want to say thank you to our esteemed panel once again. You guys are legends. So honored to be here with all of you and to learn along with everybody. Very, very grateful. So again, once again, please go check out the book, Two World Wars and Hitler, TrineDay.com. And please join us on the next episode. We're going to get even further into it. We're getting to the real juicy stuff, guys. So make sure you tune in next time. And once again, my name is Scott Armstrong. Very grateful to be here with you guys, and we'll see you next time. Peace.